have Brunello Rosa? Good morning, Brunello Rosa, CEO of Rosa Rubini Associates. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly so far. So we were talking about the ECB meeting on Thursday. What are you looking at? Inflationary pressures to the upside, Weidmann's departure, or what is, how can I say, the major topic this Thursday?
So this Thursday is going to be a transition meeting, in our opinion. It's going to be mostly preparation and groundwork for the December announcements that are likely to be quite substantial. The ECB is preparing to go to the next phase of its monetary policy action, post-pandemic we can call it, or at least post-pandemic emergency. December is the time in which the new forecasts are going to be released, and so it's the right time for the ECB to announce those changes. Therefore, in October, it's probably going to be mostly two things. First, pushing back some of the recent price action, whereby market participants have expected some increase in interest rates way before the ECB is comfortable with. And the other things, announcing that the ECB has been presented, the Governing Council has been presented some options to go further in its policy action beyond March 2022, when the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program is currently scheduled to be terminated.
I was wondering, do you think that Christine Lagarde, the president, of course, of the ECB, will voice concern over rising inflation?
Well, the ECB is watching inflation data like everybody else in the market and in the policy-making space. They saw Eurozone inflation reaching 3.4% recently, German inflation soaring and also increasing in other countries. So clearly the ECB will have to say something regarding rising inflation. However, the narrative, in our opinion, remains unchanged, in the sense that the ECB will most likely reiterate that this inflation spike is effectively temporary, and that some of the factors that have been pushed inflation up in the last few months will subside with the turn of the year, or at least early next year, being base effects, of course, being higher energy prices, being disruption in global supply chains, and the reopening of the economy further to following the closures of last year and early next year. We need to see whether this narrative holds longer, because of course transitory factors are only transitory if in fact they terminate at some point. If instead they become persistent, then the ECB will probably have to change its narrative on inflation, and until that happens, the ECB will not change its policy stance, I believe.
On the other side, I was wondering, is it credible, the transitory narrative, when it comes to inflationary pressures, considering the numbers of Germany, for example?
That's the theme that most central banks are looking at around the globe. All of them, most of them have their narrative around inflation being transitory, but all of them are wondering whether this is actually true or not. Some of them fear that in fact they might prove more persistent than currently thought, and they are start positioning against that. The Bank of England is one of them. In fact, next week they may be increasing their base rate, although by a minuscule 15 basis points, but still inverting the tendency of the last few years, in fact. And the ECB is in a slightly more cautious / dovish camp compared to, say, the Bank of England, as I just mentioned, but also the Fed and the central bank that in fact have increased interest rates, such as Norges Bank and Reserve Bank of New Zealand. So the ECB will say that they are closely monitoring inflation. They will probably say that they still believe that inflation is transitory, and therefore that the market should focus on the medium-term forecast that the ECB will release in December, which is likely to show inflation still below the 2% target and only rising gradually towards 2% in following years.
In final take, very quickly, what's your opinion in regards to these European bond yields, which are pretty interesting or starting to be interesting? The 10-year Italian 0.92, the spread between the 10-year Italian and 10-year German 105 basis points, and of course we do witness also surge in T-note yields, the 10-year at 1.62, the 30 at 2.06. What is the bond market signaling in your opinion?
So two things regarding European spreads. Clearly, as the bond yield rises, and now we are virtually at minus 10, minus 12 basis points, as the bond yield rises, then the spreads will tend to amplify, so to speak, because as the level increases, also the spread increases with the level. Okay, so we shouldn't be totally surprised about that, unless there are some idiosyncratic factors that suggest that, for example, the Italian economy is performing better than the German economy, or there are other situations on debt, inflation, and so on. Unfortunately, this is not the case, but that's the same for Spain, France, and other countries. So as the bond yield increases, bond spreads increase. Of course, bond yield increase also because the US Treasury yield is increasing, and is increasing because the Fed has announced in its minutes that is ready to start tapering its asset purchases perhaps already in November. And also because, of course, inflation is proving more persistent than initially thought. Has reached 5.4% recently, which is almost double than in the Eurozone. So, just to answer your final question, what are bond yields signaling? That there are inflation scares priced in the market, that the market believes that central banks might be slightly behind the curve, although this might prove not to be the case. And of course that there are concerns about growth and therefore debt sustainability, which is reflected in higher long-term real yields, which are an important component of nominal yields.
Thank you very much. Brunello Rosa, CEO, Rosa Verbini Associates. Thank you for joining us and have a great day ahead.
Thank you very much.